the best artist in the world, but sometimes having it in 1D, you can understand it a little bit better. But if we look here, this part is the part that you see on the outside of your head. It's called the pinna. And I don't always use the technical terms, but that is the technical term for it, pinna or auricle. Right here we have your ear canal. Those two parts together are part of your outer ear, so it makes up your outer ear. At the end of the ear canal is your eardrum, also known as the tympanic membrane. Three of the tiniest bones in the body, the malleus, incus, and stapes, or the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Those three bones, the eardrum, and then this tube right here, which is cut off in this picture, but that tube is called the eustachian tube. This whole section here is called the middle ear. This tube goes to the back of your throat, and it opens and closes several times a day. So when you hear your ears pop, as you yawn, or you chew, or you go up in elevation, that tube is opening up and bringing air up into that space.
Why does it do that?
It equalizes the pressure on either side of the eardrum. So the only way to keep that equivalent is to bring air up into that space, because eventually if this stays closed or it's clogged with mucus from a cold, it will eventually, all that air will get absorbed, and this pressure in here will be very, what we call negative, relative to the pressure on the outside. So your ear would feel very stuffy or full. Okay. In kids, this tube is more horizontal. In adults, it kind of takes this type of position, almost vertical, but not quite. So in children, that's why they're more susceptible to ear infections, because the fluid gets backed up behind the eardrum and gets caught there. These two parts together are called the outer ear. I'm sorry, the conductive mechanism. So we'll get the outer ear and the middle ear. The two parts together are called the conductive mechanism. When a sound comes in, the air vibrates, it hits the eardrum and moves those three bones. So we're conducting sound through that whole system. If you have any type of problem that causes a hearing loss in this part of the ear, it's called a conductive hearing loss. Then we get to the inner part of the ear, and we have a structure called the cochlea, and these semicircular canals which control your balance. Inside the cochlea, there's fluid and tiny little hairs that sit on a membrane, and those hairs, when they move, they trigger nerve impulses up the auditory nerve to the brain. This section here, this inner ear portion plus the nerve, is considered the sensory neural portion of the ear. So if you have a hearing loss there, it's called a sensory neural hearing loss. So you can have a hearing loss here, or you could have one in both places.
Is one easier to treat than the other?
Yes, very good question. These types of hearing losses, so conductive hearing losses, are more easily treatable with medicine or surgery than the inner ear types of hearing losses. So when you have damage to the inner ear structures, those are least likely to be treated by medicine or surgery. Things that happen out here, you can get a hole in your eardrum, you can get fluid in the middle ear. This bone, in some people that have a condition called otosclerosis, can fuse so it doesn't move, and they can replace that with a prosthesis. So you can put a prosthetic bone there and keep this moving. You can get a big plug of wax in there and cause a conductive hearing loss. You can have an infection of the walls of the ear canal and they can swell shut. You could be born without an ear canal. So if you don't have an ear canal, you don't have a way for the sound waves to get in there. Okay. I did skip a portion of the test because I don't have the device with me, but there's another part of the test where we put a headband over your head and we vibrate the skull bones into the inner ear, And that's how we tell whether or not you have a conductive or a sensorineural hearing loss. So we do 2 tests, ear conduction with headphones, and then bone conduction with a device called a bone oscillator. The testing is the same, you listen to tones, but it bypasses this portion of the ear and goes directly here, so that's how we tell the difference. So what I determined, not knowing your history or anything, I determined ahead of time that you do have a pretty significant hearing loss in both your ears. You're communicating very well for the amount of hearing loss that you ended up having, so.
I knew it. I knew it.
So you guys, if you want to, you can refer to the audiogram that I have. I didn't write out this audiogram, but if you want anything to look at to see the grid that I'm explaining. Actually, I can put it up on board then. Let's see, that's probably a better one to look at. It's not quite the audiogram that I gave you, but at least you guys can see the audiogram. So the audiogram, once I tested your hearing, is I plotted the results on a graph that we call an audiogram. And the graph is laid out in terms of pitch and intensity or volume. So this side of the graph are low pitch sounds, like a drum beating, a foghorn sound. This sometimes can be difficult if somebody hasn't heard a lot of sound, because they don't know, they've never heard a bird tweet, so this often trips me up when I talk about high pitches especially. I know that oftentimes people with severe to profound hearing losses, they can feel vibrations, they know some of those low pitch sounds, but the high pitches, bird makes a sound, birds tweet, watches tick, there's a few high-pitched sounds that you can refer to. Okay, so the low pitches are over here and the high pitches are over here. So it goes from low to high. This side of the graph goes from very quiet sounds to very, very loud sounds. So -10 is a very, very quiet sound, all the way to 120, which is a very, very loud sound.
And most of mine are down there, so I probably didn't do